I never imagined the two people I trusted most, my husband and my best friend, would betray me in the worst way possible. We shared dreams, secrets, and countless memories, but behind my back, they were weaving a lie so deep it destroyed everything I believed in. This story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about the devastating collapse of trust, the unbearable pain of betrayal, and the struggle to rebuild a life when the people you love turn into strangers. If you've ever faced betrayal by those closest to you, this story will hit home. Part 1, the beginning of the end. I remember the first time I met James. We were inseparable almost instantly, two souls intertwined by fate and a shared love for all things chaotic and beautiful. Our friendship was effortless, like breathing. We spent weekends exploring the city, late-night talks, and endless laughter. When I met Daniel, I thought my life was finally complete. James was my best friend, and Daniel was the man who promised forever. The three of us became a little family, bound by trust and love, or so I believed. For years, life felt perfect. Daniel and I built a home, bought a dog, and dreamed of children. James was there every step, the brother I never had. I confided in him everything, my fears, hopes, and even doubts about my marriage. He listened with kindness, always giving me comfort when I needed it most. But that's when the cracks began. I noticed the subtle changes, the stolen glances, the hushed phone calls, the sudden disappearances. At first, I pushed the thoughts away, convincing myself it was paranoia. After all, how could the two people I loved betray me? One night, everything unraveled. I came home early from a business trip, excited to surprise Daniel. As I quietly stepped inside, I heard voices, familiar voices. From the hallway, I saw Daniel and James, their hands intertwined, their smiles secretive. The weight of their betrayal crushed me in an instant. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just stood there, frozen, as the life I thought I had built crumbled in front of my eyes. The days that followed were a haze of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. I confronted them, but the apologies were hollow, the excuses worse. I realized then that this wasn't just a fleeting mistake, it was a choice they made, one that shattered me completely. But the story didn't end there. The fallout was brutal. Friends took sides, family grew distant, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. This is my story of love, betrayal, loss, and the painful journey of finding myself again in the wreckage of lies. Part 2, the fallout and the fight to survive. The moment I confronted Daniel and James, everything changed, but not in the way I expected. Instead of shock or guilt, I was met with cold indifference. Daniel's eyes, once warm and full of love, were empty and distant. James barely looked at me, like I was an inconvenient truth he wished to avoid. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I packed a bag that night and left before they even noticed. The apartment I had called home for years suddenly felt like a prison filled with memories that stabbed like knives. I stayed with my sister for a few weeks, but even there, the wounds were raw and deep. Every time my phone buzzed, a part of me hoped it was Daniel or James reaching out, but it never was. No apology, no explanation, just silence. The silence screamed louder than any words ever could. Friends I thought would support me turned away. Some whispered that maybe I hadn't been enough, too naive, too trusting. I swallowed my pride and cried myself to sleep, questioning if I would ever be whole again. Yet, amidst the rubble, a small flame flickered inside me, a fierce determination not to be broken by the people who were supposed to love me. I started therapy, trying to untangle the web of emotions that choked me: betrayal, grief, anger, and shame. Slowly, I began to see that their choices were about them, not me. Meanwhile, Daniel and James moved on quickly, together, without shame, flaunting their new relationship as if nothing had happened. It stung like acid. I decided to focus on myself. I went back to work, buried myself in projects, and reached out to people I had ignored for years. Little by little, I began to build a support system. But the hardest part was learning to forgive myself for trusting, for loving, for believing in something that wasn't real. And just when I thought I was starting to heal, fate threw me another cruel curveball. One rainy afternoon, I got a call from the hospital. Daniel had been in an accident. A drunk driver had hit him head-on. His injuries were severe, and the prognosis was uncertain. The woman who had betrayed me, the man who had shattered my life, was now fighting for his life. I stood at a crossroads, between bitterness and compassion, between revenge and forgiveness. I knew then that this story wasn't just about betrayal, it was about survival, about what it truly means to love and to let go. Part 3, Facing the Past and Choosing the Future. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and despair. I sat there, heart pounding, mind racing with every possible outcome. I never imagined I'd be praying for Daniel, the man who had broken me so completely. When the doctor finally came out, his face was grave. He's stable for now, but the road ahead will be long and complicated. Sitting beside his hospital bed that first night, I was flooded with memories, the good and the terrible. The way he used to hold my hand when I was scared, the laughter we shared in better days, and the crushing weight of his betrayal. I couldn't decide what to feel, anger, sorrow, or something else entirely. James never showed up. I found out later he had disappeared without a trace, leaving Daniel to face the consequences alone. Watching Daniel struggle to recover, I realized something: the man I had loved was gone. What remained was a stranger trapped in a broken body. But something inside me shifted. I no longer wanted revenge or bitterness. I wanted peace. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry, not tears of pain, but of release. In the following weeks, I visited Daniel regularly. Our conversations were awkward at first, filled with silence and regret. He apologized, genuinely this time, but I knew forgiveness wouldn't come overnight. Outside the hospital walls, my own life was changing too. I reconnected with old friends, rediscovered passions I'd abandoned, and slowly, piece by piece, rebuilt my identity. One evening, after a particularly long visit, Daniel looked at me and said, "I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope someday you can find happiness." His words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. That night, as I drove home, I realized the story wasn't about the pain he caused me, but about the strength I found to rise above it. I was no longer a victim, I was a survivor. And while the scars would always remain, I was ready to write the next chapter of my life, one filled with hope, resilience, and self-love. Part 4, A Letter He Never Read. After everything, I never thought I'd sit by Daniel's bedside again, but there I was, day after day, watching the man who once shattered me struggle to learn how to walk again, how to speak clearly, how to hold a fork. There was a strange kind of quiet redemption in those moments. We didn't talk about James. We didn't need to. That chapter was closed. But pain leaves echoes. At night, I'd lie in bed and replay everything in my head: the dinners, the arguments, the laughter that slowly died between us. I remembered the way Daniel used to call me his home, and how easily he'd found comfort in someone else's arms. I started writing a letter, not for Daniel to read, but for me. Dear Daniel, I loved you more than I loved myself, and maybe that was the problem. I gave you everything: my trust, my time, my youth, and when you chose someone else, you didn't just betray me, you betrayed the version of me that believed in you. But here's the truth: I'm not writing this out of hate. I'm writing this to let go. I can't carry the weight of your choices anymore. I won't let what you did define me. You hurt me, but you also taught me how strong I am. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and burned it on my balcony that night. As the paper turned to ash, so did the last remnants of the life I had grieved for. Daniel was transferred to a rehabilitation center soon after. We hugged goodbye, quietly, like two people who once knew each other deeply but were now on different shores. I didn't visit again. Instead, I focused on reclaiming my life. I started hiking on weekends, joined a book club, painted again, messy strokes and all. I even took a spontaneous trip to the coast and stood barefoot on the edge of the ocean, letting the waves wash over my ankles. Freedom didn't come all at once. It came in tiny moments, the first laugh that wasn't forced, the morning I woke up without thinking of them, the day I realized I was no longer waiting for closure. One evening, I ran into James. He looked older, tired. The shine in his eyes, that magnetic energy he once carried, was gone. We locked eyes, but neither of us said a word. He looked like he wanted to, maybe to explain, maybe to ask for forgiveness, but I turned and walked away. That silence was my power. Later that night, I journaled. I may never get the answers I want, but I've finally stopped needing them. Part 5. What the ocean took. Months passed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had peace. Not the loud, triumphant kind, but a quiet stillness that settles after the storm. My apartment was mine again. The shadows had lifted. I no longer checked my phone expecting a message. I no longer dreamed in arguments. I even started seeing someone. Ethan was gentle, older, quiet. We met at the community center where I volunteered. He brought coffee without asking, listened without judgment, and never pressed for more than I could give. With him, I didn't have to explain the scars. He just noticed them, and never asked how they got there. I was rebuilding. But peace has its price. It came one gray Thursday in March, when my phone buzzed just as I was finishing a painting. A number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Is this Anna Monroe?" a soft voice asked. "Yes. This is Mercy General. You're listed as Daniel Monroe's emergency contact. He's here. There's been an accident." My knees buckled. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in 6 months. After rehab, he moved out of state. We had no contact, no closure. I had let go of him like a balloon into the sky, small, distant, irrelevant. But now I was back in a hospital hallway, heart pounding, hands trembling, waiting for a doctor to speak. Daniel had been driving along the coast. His car swerved on wet pavement and crashed through the guardrail. They said he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. They didn't know if he would wake up. I stared at him through the glass. Machines beeped. Tubes ran across his arms. His face, though bruised, looked calm, as if sleeping. I stepped into the room. "Why me, Daniel?" I whispered. "After everything?" I sat beside him, holding the hand that once wore my wedding ring. His fingers didn't curl around mine. Hours passed, then a day. Then another. On the third night, I spoke to his mother. I asked about James. She said they hadn't spoken in months. Said he disappeared after Daniel got out of rehab. They were toxic together, she said. Daniel was starting to get better. "I think he wanted to make peace with you. But peace would never come." That night, I dreamed of the beach again, the wind in my hair, Daniel beside me, young again, barefoot and grinning. I woke with tears on my face. When I returned to the hospital the next morning, Daniel was gone. There was a note at the nurse's desk. He passed at 4:13 a.m. No final words, no dramatic closure. Just silence. And yet, something in me broke loose. Not the grief I expected, but release. I stood on the cliffs that evening, the same stretch of coast he had been driving before the crash. The wind whipped at my coat, the sea roaring far below. I took a deep breath and whispered into the air, "I forgive you." Because I had to. For me. Not for him. Not for what we lost. But for the woman I was still becoming, whole, hurt, and healing. Part 6. The Last Ghost. 3 weeks after Daniel's funeral, I got a letter. A real one, in a plain white envelope. No return address. The handwriting was familiar. Sharp, slanted, urgent. James. I stared at it for hours before opening it. I didn't know what I expected, an apology, a confession, a final twist. But the contents weren't what I imagined. "Anna. If you're reading this, then you know Daniel's gone. I wasn't brave enough to come to the hospital, or the funeral. Maybe I'm still a coward. I never set out to destroy you, or him, what we had. I don't even know what to call it. Need? Loneliness? He loved you, in his own broken way. He always did. I guess I just wanted to matter to someone. But in the end, I left because I saw what I'd done. I saw your face that night, in the rain, when you looked at me like I was a stranger. You were right. I hope someday you find someone who deserves your heart. And I hope, somehow, you can forget me. I'm trying to forget myself. J. I folded the letter, hands shaking, not out of anger, but out of emptiness. James had vanished like a ghost. No address, no number, nothing to chase, and for the first time, I didn't want to. Instead, I went home and lit a candle. I placed the letter beside Daniel's old wedding band, the one I'd kept buried in a drawer. I let the candle burn down as I sat in silence, eyes closed. listening to the sounds of the city outside my window. I was done chasing answers. Done rewriting the past. That weekend, I packed a suitcase and drove north. I found a quiet bed and breakfast near the mountains, surrounded by pine trees and the scent of cold earth. I left my phone turned off. I took long walks. I wrote in my journal. I painted again. And I finally let myself cry. Not just for what had happened, but for the version of me who had believed in fairy tales, who had stood at the altar with her heart wide open, who had trusted too soon, forgiven too often, and broken quietly behind closed doors. I mourned her. And then, I thanked her. Because that girl, that fragile, hopeful version of me, had survived the fire. And from her ashes, I was building something new. Something stronger. On my last morning there, I hiked up to a high ridge and watched the sun rise. The sky turned gold and violet. The wind wrapped around me like an old friend. I whispered a goodbye to no one. To everyone. And then I turned back toward the trail, ready to go home. Ready, finally, to begin again. Part 7, a different kind of goodbye. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. Not because I looked so different, though my hair was shorter now, my eyes a little wiser, but because I finally felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Not the fake kind, the smile for everyone kind, the real kind, the kind that settles in your chest when you stop fighting what was, and start accepting what is. I had moved into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine. There were plants on the windowsill and paintbrushes in a jar on my desk. I started working at a local nonprofit, helping women in crisis, women who had stories like mine, some much worse. Their strength inspired me, reminded me that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy. Some days you cry for no reason, some days you laugh too hard, and some nights, you still dream of people who hurt you. That's okay. I didn't need to forget Daniel, or James, or the life I had lost. I just needed to stop letting it define me. But fate, as always, had one last echo to send my way. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at a coffee shop, sketching in my notebook, when a little girl came running in from the storm. Her curls were soaked, her jacket too big for her tiny frame. A woman followed behind, older, maybe late 30s, with familiar eyes. My heart stopped. Sophie. She froze when she saw me. For a moment, the cafe fell away. It was just the two of us, standing across the years. She looked tired, pale. She had a long scar down her neck I'd never seen before, and in her arms, the child clung to her coat like a lifeline. Anna, she said, voice cracking. I didn't say anything. What are the odds? She whispered, glancing away. I didn't know you lived around here. I do, I replied calmly. A pause. Her lips trembled. This is my daughter, she said finally. Her name is Hope. I looked at the girl, wide brown eyes, maybe 5 years old. Something in her expression, shy, curious, kind, tugged at something deep inside me. She's beautiful, I said softly. Sophie nodded, eyes welling up. We didn't talk about Daniel, or what had happened. We didn't need to. It was all there, unspoken, the pain, the shame, the loss, the pieces too broken to fit back together. But as Hope tugged at her mother's hand and they turned to leave, Sophie hesitated. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. I didn't answer. I just watched them go, their shadows stretching across the floor, disappearing into the gray rain beyond the glass. That night, I wrote a letter I never sent. Dear Sophie, I don't forgive you. Not yet, maybe never. But I'm letting go. We were both lost, once. I hope you're finding your way. Anna. And that was the final goodbye. Not loud, not angry, just quiet, like a door softly closing. I lit one last candle in my windowsill and watched it flicker. Then I picked up my brush and painted the sunrise. Because life didn't stop. It never does.